Welcome to another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. Good evening. I'm your host, Buford Terrell. Clayton Jones, who's usually here with me, is a little bit under the weather tonight, so it's just you and me. To preserve yourself from my non-ending stream of words, let's see if we can't keep the telephone fairly busy. I want to start tonight by answering a question that I was stumped with on the last show. A caller had asked what I knew about a new drug known as Serenity. And at that time, I had to tell him I didn't know anything at all about it. It turns out that Serenity is one of several names that a new mixture of basically fragrance sachets that has been laced with a chemical commonly known as K2 is being sold under. It's available in a lot of smoke shops around the country. Spice is another name. It apparently gives people a high somewhat similar to marijuana. It turns out that the active ingredient in it is a chemical that was developed to test cannabinoid receptors in animal brains, and it has been administered primarily to rats. The inventor of the drug has said it was never meant to be used on humans. It has not been tested on humans. There's no safety data at all available on it, and in his view, anyone that put it in themselves would be crazy. In addition, it's normally sold packaged with fragrance things like lavender, lilac, which aren't much good for smoking anyway. So I would suggest that, especially it's something new, it hasn't been around very long, there's no data on it yet, I would suggest it's probably something to avoid. And incidentally, for any of you that have questions about anything, any drug that is being used or that you might be tempted by, the first place to look for answers is to go to the Arrowid website. That's www.arrowid.org. Now, this is a nonprofit organization that's been active for close to 40 years now. They try to provide a responsible database for all of the psychoactive drugs that are out there. It's reliable enough that both drug users and the government rely upon their information. It has chemical and medical information about almost all of the drugs that have been used. You can look them up by medical, chemical, or proper names. You can do searches, which includes even names like Serenity. They also have an extensive database of first-person reports of the experiences of various drugs. So if you have questions before putting something in your body, I would suggest look at the data on Arrowid first and let that at least guide your thinking a little bit. It's probably the most reliable source of information on drugs that's available anywhere. And while it does have some of the hard scientific and chemical and medical data, most of the material on the site is easily understandable by almost anyone. So if you want to know more about the effects, good and bad, of almost any of the drugs out there, Arrowid's a place to go. One little tidbit, for instance, this current drug that's also known as Spice and several other things is not the first thing that's been called Serenity. Going back even to the middle of 1970s, one of the early artificial psychedelics that went by the name STP. At that time was also called Serenity, usually called Serenity, Tranquility, Peace. It didn't stay around very long, didn't have that much to recommend it. Okay, as I say, the phones are live, so we'll hope that you call in and keep me from just chattering on and on and on and on. If you're looking either on streaming video on the web or on a delayed basis on YouTube, we do have an email address where you can send your question or comments, and I'll answer those. We may use some of them on the air later. It's time to turn to the news for what's been happening lately, and it's been a pretty active couple of weeks. First, the District of Columbia City Council has voted to enact the district's medical marijuana law. That will become law unless Congress takes the affirmative act of vetoing it. Now, remember, the District of Columbia is not a state. It's governed directly by Congress, but Congress has delegated state government-like functions to the City Council with the proviso that if the City Council enacts a law, then Congress has approximately 2 months to veto it or it will become effective. Hello, caller, you're on the air. Hello.
Yeah, I was wanting to know, like, are y'all trying to legalize weed?
Okay, that's a good question. I think that I personally am trying to do away with prohibition laws. Drug Policy Forum of Texas, our sponsoring organization, is looking to improve, modernize, and rationalize drug laws. I think most of the people that we have up here on the show are either in favor of approving marijuana for medical use or full all-out legalization of marijuana. Now, as I was saying, I think probably the biggest news is that the District of Columbia now has a medical marijuana statute, assuming that Congress doesn't veto it. And I have not seen any stirs or rumblings out of Congress that they intend to do anything about it. I know personally I get a great big smile on my face when I visualize the head of the DEA looking out of his office window there in the district and seeing a medical marijuana dispensary right across the street. So we'll see how this plays out in practice. The flip side of the coin happened in Illinois. There, the legislative session ran out before the Illinois House could take action on their pending medical marijuana bill. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there next week. The other big political step this week is that finally, some 3 months past the deadline, the administration in the Office of National Drug Control Policy released their 2010 drug strategy statement. This came out yesterday. It is unfortunately largely business as usual. The Obama administration, through this statement, is urging much more effort being put in drug use prevention and in therapy and treatment for those that have become addicted or habituated to drug use. But there is no real reduction in the money spent on or the emphasis placed on enforcement. So it was really not much of a change in policy. The shift in emphasis is there, but not very much has been done to carry that shift out. More things, I think. One legislature in one of the other states deserves the black mark of shame for at least the month, if not the whole year. His state's legislature was looking at a medical marijuana act, and he proposed an amendment to that act that if one were issued a medical marijuana card, he would have to surrender his driver's license and he would not be eligible for employment in any public job and would be barred, as I recall, from attending any of the state-sponsored universities. I don't know. It sounds to me like the guy is confusing marijuana with Dr. Jekyll's Mr. Hyde serum that a taste turned him into a raving monster. That's all I can figure out. But luckily, his colleagues weren't willing to go along with it. We are starting to see, as the California campaign for legalization heats up, the first of the professional odds makers coming out, those places that allow legal betting on the things like outcome of election, the first odds makers coming out with their official lines that they're willing to accept bets on right now are favoring the passage of legalization in California about 56 to 45% or so. So the guys that make their money by taking bets are saying legalization is looking likely. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yes. I'm a local. I live in the area, and I just don't. I'm watching your TV show.
Yes. Do you have a comment or a question?
I'm really just wondering, how can they? We need to figure out how we could take and legalize marijuana, because I feel with the stress that I deal with every day, it's no different than the people who smoke tobacco, and tobacco is more accessible to kids. And you see, like, you pass the corner, you see these kids are smoking tobacco, and that's like causes more harmful threats than marijuana.
Okay, I'll certainly agree with you on that. Tobacco-related illnesses cause around 400,000 additional deaths in this country every year. Marijuana has never been associated with a medical death of any kind. Now, what should you do about it? The main thing to do about it, well, actually there are two things. The most important is that you should let your elected representatives, both in Austin and in Washington, know how you feel about the issue. They're the ones that are going to have to pass the bills. The second, you should let all of your friends know how you feel about it. And particularly that means that if you go to a church, let the other members of your church know. If you belong to any associations, make sure they know. But it's up to all of us to spread the word. Now, if you go to the state of Texas webpage, you'll find a link on that page that lets you type in your zip code, and it will give you the names, addresses, telephone numbers, and emails of all of your elected representatives, the members of the State House of Representatives, the state senators, the members of the U.S. Congress, members of the United States Senate, so you can use that to get in touch with them and let them know how you feel on this matter. And frankly, nationwide, the more recent surveys are showing that over 40% of all of the people across the country are now in favor of legalizing marijuana. Around 80% of the people nationwide are in favor of approving marijuana for medical use. Now, as time goes on, and we've got to remember that the California medical marijuana law is now 14 years old. As time goes on, more and more I'm convinced that even those people that only want marijuana for medical use need to start insisting on all-out legalization. We are hearing too many things coming along of even people with valid medical marijuana identification cards are being fired for failing a drug test at work, whereas people taking dangerous pain-killing drugs like Oxycontin get a pass and go right on working. We have had people evicted from their apartments for storing medical marijuana where they live. We have had people barred from dormitories at school because the school has an absolute no marijuana policy. We know that pain patients going to the Veterans Administration are not allowed to bring their medicine on site at the VA, and VA doctors are prohibited from discussing the use of marijuana with them. We have been hearing that if a patient bearing a valid medical marijuana ID card is stopped by the police for any reason and has even a single joint in his possession, the police are treating this as probable cause to do a complete search of that person and his car. Now, these are all problems that need to be dealt with, and the only way they can be dealt with reasonably and fairly is to go ahead and remove all of the criminal penalties imposed on those that possess marijuana. And I think we're seeing more and more people beginning to realize this. We also see in places like California and Colorado particularly, where they have been trying to organize dispensaries to get medical marijuana to the patients, problems because only the patient's possession is legalized. We'll talk more about that after we take a break. That was a little clip showing the Houston Normal entry in this last weekend's art car parade in Houston. And I understand this is the second year that the cannabis ambulance has been in this parade, and I understand that it's really very popular with the crowd that's looking at the parade. It gets a pretty lively response. Maybe it's starting to get the word out to a few people. Before the break, and I want to remind you that be sure and call in with your questions and comments tonight. But before the break, we were talking about some of the reasons why even those favoring medical marijuana really need to be supporting legalized marijuana. And one thing that we're seeing both in California and Colorado, which have both gone further than any of the other states in trying to deliver adequate supplies of high-quality marijuana to the patients using it. They have really bad problems because by simply legalizing the patient's possession of marijuana, it still leaves the primary source of it, the people growing the plants and transporting them, as criminals growing contraband. And all over California, there have been, by now, probably hundreds of lawsuits with local government units trying to change zoning laws to prohibit dispensaries and users bringing suit to force compliance with the state law. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Hey, how you doing, sir?
Just fine.
Mr. Cole, I just want to let you know that I really appreciate what you're doing, man. This new deal they called, I think it's called Serenity.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, it's actually really hurt a few guys that I know, and I really appreciate that you're putting that on here, man, so these guys wouldn't actually go out and, try to experience this stuff for themselves, because, with these people out here pushing that in these little smoke shops, just another part of things that can cause, our government in order not to legalize marijuana. I think that legalizing it would be a great benefit, though I know and I understand that we would have to pay taxes on that. I don't know who all would have to pay,
Okay.
A certain amount of taxes. But I think we would have to pay taxes. Would everybody have to pay taxes if they was to legalize the drugs?
Okay, that's a good question. There are at least two different approaches to taxation. One approach is to simply treat it like any other good on the market and collect the normal state sales tax on the sale. The other is to treat it like alcohol or tobacco and impose a so-called sin tax, especially on the purchase of marijuana. But the other side to that is, even if legalized marijuana were taxed, the purchaser would probably end up saving lots and lots of money. Nationwide, good quality marijuana for some time now has been selling for between $200 and $400 an ounce. Now, if you look at it, marijuana is a very easy to grow plant. It doesn't take much cultivation. Its price should be more like that of broccoli. When I first started thinking about this and comparing it, I compared it to tea and coffee. Right now, if you buy tea in tea bags, you pay about $1 an ounce for it. Ground coffee is about 35 cents an ounce. Even cigarettes, with more than half their price being taxes, are about $5 a pack, and a pack is pretty close to an ounce of tobacco. So even taking that as an outrageously high price of $5 an ounce compared to the $200 an ounce that marijuana is costing, you can see part of what making it illegal does. And I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But I wanted to point out something else that this call about Serenity brought to mind. And this is, we really don't know what Serenity does to people. But we can go back to 1920 when the federal government passed prohibition laws against alcohol. And do you know what happened then? Hospital admissions started jumping by 100 times or more for people that were poisoned by bad alcohol. Either wood alcohol, like the rubbing alcohol that I hope we all know not to drink, or denatured alcohol where the government had actually required that poison be put in the alcohol to keep people from drinking it, or even some artificial things. Jamaican ginger tonic, one of the main ones that were being sold instead of alcohol. These could cause deaths. They could cause, in the case of the Jamaican ginger, permanent neurological damage causing spasms. They could cause blindness. And these things were going up, as I say, hundreds of times over what was normally seen at hospitals. In 1933, when alcohol was legalized again, these diseases started disappearing, and they disappeared rather quickly. I recently ran into a statement from a man who was an officer in the Army in Korea. And at the time, the American Army was sent to Korea in 1950. The Women's Christian Temperance League, one of the primary alcohol prohibition groups in the country, pressured the U.S. Army so that the Army only provided 1 can of beer a week per soldier to the soldier stationed in Korea. According to this man, who was a colonel at the time, they had bad problems with the men going off post into the Korean villages and buying bootleg beer, which caused the same health problems that they had seen 30 years previously with alcohol prohibition in this country. The same wood alcohol poisoning, the same Jake leg problems. And you know, we see the same thing going on with drugs that are made illegal today, that you don't know when you go down to the street corner and buy 1/8 of an ounce of marijuana, you don't know what you're getting. When you go into the smoke shop and you buy something called Spice or Serenity, you have no idea what's in that package. If you go into a regular liquor store and you buy a bottle of even the cheapest, scuzziest, no-name bourbon in that shop, you know that it's going to have ethyl alcohol. You know that you can drink it and it's not going to cause you any additional health problems beyond what the alcohol caused. If you go into a convenience store and buy a pack of cigarettes, even the cheapest, no-name ones available, you know that they're going to be as safe as any cigarettes on the market. So we're going to take another break and we'll be back in a few minutes.
about 60+% of the marijuana use in this country is clearly in Anglo communities, in white communities. But if you look at the rate of arrest, you end up realizing that 10% of the people end up accounting for 35% of the rest. If you look at the prosecution, then we end up representing about 47% of those who get prosecuted. If you look at convictions, we end up being close to 60% of those who get convicted. If you look at those who end up being incarcerated, you end up being about 72%. So you go from being 10% of the population to being 72% of the people who are being incarcerated. I call it that there is a criminal industrial complex that has learned how to mine black gold.
Hi, I'm Ethan Nadelman, the founder and executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance. You're watching Drugs, Crimes, and Politics. Hope you enjoy it.
Welcome back to Drugs, Crime, and Politics. Let's go to the telephone. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Good day.
Good day.
Right now?
Yes. Do you have a comment or question?
Sure. I've been arrested before for marijuana, and they consider it a drug. And I decided to go look at the definition of the word drug, and there's no way that marijuana follows underneath the definition of a drug. And I just find it a crime to be arrested for something that's not actually illegal.
Okay. That's an interesting comment. Although under the Federal Controlled Substances Act, I'm afraid I would have to disagree with you. Because under the Federal Act, a drug is defined as any substance taken into the body for the purpose of having it produce some effect on the mind or body. Now, some people quibble on whether or not a natural plant like marijuana is a drug as compared to, say, aspirin, which is a chemical. That's not really a distinction that bears up much in the real world. If we look at cocaine, for instance, it's nothing but an alkaloid removed directly from the leaf of the coca. The native of South America, or the American drinking Coca-Cola before 1903, taking coca leaf, was getting exactly the same chemical in their body that the current person smoking crack is getting today. Likewise, the person shooting heroin or morphine into a vein is getting something that naturally occurs in the opium poppy. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yes, sir. I was told by my father, who's an attorney, that law uses very explicit definitions for every word used, and they consider marijuana as a drug. So I decided to find out what the definition of a drug was, and there's no way that marijuana follows underneath the definition of a drug.
Well, where did you look and what did you find?
I looked in Black's Law Dictionary, Bouvier's Law Dictionary, and I found that drug is a substance that man has changed in molecular structure to suit his needs.
Okay.
And I brought it up in court, and I've had the judges freaking out on it because they tell me that that's not true, and I asked them to prove it.
Okay.
I can't prove it, and they escort me out of the courtroom.
Okay. That's one of the unfortunate things about law is when I started law school, one of the first books I bought was a Black's Law Dictionary. and I don't think I ever looked at it after the first semester in law school. The problem is most of those entries are very general. Most of those are also very, very old. In doing research on the law itself, you have to look usually at a specific statute, and you'll find most of those statutes carry their own definitions with them. Now, I suspect the judge hadn't done much more research than you had on it, but as I say, the Federal Controlled Substances Act and the Texas Controlled Substances Act as well have their own statute-specific definitions of drugs, which do include marijuana. Thank you. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Hi. I wanted to, I guess, make a comment that kind of turns into a question.
Okay.
If people who are in, positions in life who, are, I guess, just regular members of society, like who go to church and have families and have a wife and children and a house note, if those people don't write their congressman and don't, make it known to everybody in their life that they are okay with this and that they use marijuana and that they think it should be legalized, if those people, don't feel free to say that they use this drug because of the stigma still associated with it, and the only people that are speaking about it, publicly and freely are people, who maybe don't have as much to lose when that stigma comes along, or whose peers kind of feel the same way and openly talk about it as well. So how, is there any other way, do you think, to get this legalized? With, do we have to, because a lot of people won't go out there and start speaking about it because of the stigma involved. So
Okay.
Is there any other way, or that you see that we could get there?
Okay, that's a very good question. It's a very perceptive observation, and it's one that I don't have any real direct answer to, except possibly to refer back to one of the true founding fathers of this country, a man named Thomas Paine, who wrote a book called Common Sense that was one of the real foundation stones of American society. And basically he says that it's our obligation when the time comes to step up and do our part, even if it's hard to do. Now, we used to joke around the courthouse that no one knows how smart the average crook is because only the dumb crooks get caught. We can also joke and say, no one knows what a successful drug user looks like because only the lousy drug users get caught. And we have people like Carl Sagan, the great astronomer. We didn't know until after his death that he was a lifelong pot user. So far, the only people that seem to have the freedom to speak out are those in the entertainment business. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yes, sir. My question is, why is marijuana illegal?
That's a good question. That's a good question, and I wish I knew. Now, starting back about 1910 to 1915, there was a revolution in Mexico, and a lot of refugees from Mexico came across the border into the United States. They brought with them marijuana. A lot of the old established Anglos in West Texas, Colorado, Arizona, California, Utah didn't like having those Mexicans there. They were very suspicious of them, and they started passing state laws in an attempt to harass these people back into Mexico. Then during the Depression, when agricultural work went to hell, there weren't jobs for these people, there weren't jobs for anyone. These same states pressured the federal government to help them out. They asked for a federal law against marijuana. Congress passed the law in 1937, and the only scientific or medical person that testified to Congress at the time that law was passed was the representative of the American Medical Association, who said the law wasn't needed, doctors could handle any of the problems and there wouldn't be many, and that the law would cut off medical research. And that's where the laws against marijuana came from. The debate on a Friday afternoon in Congress took less than a half an hour. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yes, I had a question.
Yes, sir.
Are there any side effects of smoking the Serenity?
Is there any what of smoking Serenity?
Are there any side effects?
When I traced it on Arrowwood, there haven't been enough reports yet to really establish much. There have been a couple of emergency room reports, but not enough to really establish any kind of real definite statement about it. The main thing is that the man that invented it, the man who has done the most laboratory work, is very, very strong in stating that we don't know anything at all about the safety risk when it's used by humans. I would say that, quite frankly, if you've just got to smoke something, you're probably a whole lot better off going out on the street corner and breaking the law to get a little weed than you are being the experimental guinea pig for something like Serenity. But it's your body, and to some extent you have the right to decide what you want to put into it. So if you want to run the risk, just know that you are running a risk, that there's no real evidence to say either that it's safe or it's not safe at this point. And something else that frankly concerns me as much as the marijuana imitating chemical in Serenity, the K2, is that the Serenity is a mixture of all sorts of good smelling things. And I don't know that I would take the typical floral sachet that you can buy in the health shop, roll it up and smoke it like a cigarette. I'm just not really sure what lavender and lilac and violet and cinnamon smoke would do to my lungs either. So remember this, you're getting all of that other junk as well as the K2 when you smoke Serenity. And what's even worse, you have no idea from one batch to the next what's in any of them. There's no consistency, there's no bit of control or regulation, and there's no statement of contents on any of it. So, it's in a sense, and I don't want to be too alarmist here, because I haven't really heard anything that suggests that K2 is unusually or particularly dangerous. But in a sense, when you start trying something like that, you're playing at least a weak version of Russian roulette. So you pays your money and takes your chances. But I'm not going to recommend it to anyone. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
I'm on the air right now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I was wondering, I just turned the channel on. I was watching you guys' program and wondering, what are you talking, is there some kind of laws passed in Texas that you can get medical marijuana?
No. Not in Texas.
Not in Texas at all?
No.
So about this K2 and stuff, is it bad? I tried it, and I did it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say it's probably not healthy to smoke.
Okay. As I was saying, I don't know if it's bad or not. But Thank you for your call. If I cut it off, it's time to take another break.
Okay, maybe a little of the money I spend on marijuana supports terror and violence.
Right.
And that's because marijuana is illegal.
Exactly.
When I buy a beer, that doesn't support terror because beer is legal, right?
Now you've got it.
So what you're saying is if we make marijuana legal and regulate it like beer, that wouldn't support violence.
Did I say that?
I remember just going in, taking a small area of my community and for all practical purposes, cordoning it off, completely cleaning it up, using some pretty sophisticated techniques, trampling all over the edges of the Constitution to do so. But I mean, really cleaning it up and getting all of the dope dealers out of there. And to my dismay, 90 days later, I had a Haitian group to move in from downstate. I had the Miami boys to move in from Jacksonville, and they were shooting machine guns and beating people mercilessly, and I wanted my old dope dealers back.
Welcome back. We have another caller. Hello, caller. You're on the air. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Hello. Go ahead.
Hello, are you there? I just wanted to weigh in on the subject tonight. I really feel that we need to really stick together and fight as a country for our rights, and legalizing this for medical medical purposes would just be the start. Nowadays, you go for a job and you get a drug test as far as like a urine test. Now they're trying to push for a hair follicle test, and it seems like we're just losing our rights, more and more as time goes by. And I just feel like, if we could just stick together and maybe unite, maybe we could get something done. So.
Okay, thank you for your comment. In his first inaugural speech in 1933, at the very depths of the Great Depression, Franklin Roosevelt, in what I think is one of the most wise statements ever made, said, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." And if you look at it, when we look at prohibition laws, whether there were laws prohibiting alcohol, whether they're today's laws prohibiting drugs, these are laws that are driven strictly by fear, and they make us act in really, really stupid ways. Now, that last break, we had people talking about drug money going to gangs and terrorists. If we take what I was saying a little bit earlier about the price of illegal drugs compared to legal drugs, and let's talk about marijuana at $1 an ounce instead of $200 an ounce. Right now we have a terrible war going on just south of our border in Mexico, with more people killed there than we have lost American troops in Iraq. About 30 billion American dollars every year go to the drug cartels in Mexico. Half of that money is for marijuana. If we cut that down from $200 an ounce to $1 an ounce, the cartels down there no longer would have anything to fight over, and they certainly couldn't buy the guns to do the fighting. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hello?
Hello, do you have a question?
Hello? Hi, I had a question. What do you think is the best way for the Obama administration, or what needs to be done for them to address the issue of legalizing marijuana now that we have a Democratic president in power?
Okay. You know, what needs to be done in Washington right now is for some congressmen to show a little courage. Obama, frankly, has spent a year trying to juggle about 7 or 8 flaming torches all at once and not start a bonfire. By the time you look at Iraq, Afghanistan, the financial market, and now the Gulf oil spill, the banking crisis, the home foreclosures, frankly, I'm not surprised that he hasn't done a lot yet about drugs. He did stop enforcement of the federal laws against state-sanctioned marijuana drug use. I think that if he would simply say the drug laws are foolish and need to be changed, that one statement is all it would take. Our real problem is that, as I was saying about fearing fear, congressmen, in fact politicians in general, are motivated by fear. They're not going to do anything that they're afraid will cost them votes. And right now they're afraid that if they look like they're soft on drugs, that people won't vote for them anymore. I think maybe that attitude is starting to change. And interestingly, this D.C. medical marijuana law may be an important straw in the wind. If Congress lets that go into effect without saying anything, with Congress having just changed the student assistance laws to remove some of the drug law blocks against students getting financial aid, with Congress removing the ban on funding for needle exchange programs, we've seen quite a bit of movement in Congress over the past 6 months or so, and I think maybe there's some straws in the wind. If California votes to legalize in the state of California in November, that should have some big, interesting repercussions in D.C. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hello, I just wanted to say that I was a long-time marijuana smoker, and during the times I started back in 1994, and I maybe quit about 6 months ago. And the reason why I quit is because I was trying to find a job. And since I had quit, I've been having a lot of problems, like with my sex life and sleeping, just not being able to just more relax. And that was because I had stopped. And the reason why, because I just didn't want to keep buying.
You're broken up, and I didn't hear that last statement.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said the last time the reason why I had stopped is because I just didn't want to get in trouble with the law, and that was the main reason why I stopped. But if the law was to let it happen, was that we could be able to smoke marijuana, it'll be a lot more. It'll be a lot more better for society. That's what I want to say.
Okay, thank you. I've never heard of anyone going through any kind of physical withdrawal symptoms with marijuana. If, as he described it, this has been going on, I suspect he probably should check with his doctors and find out what the cause of it is and what's happening. I've been being hard on politicians tonight. And, you know, I'm usually very hard on Texas politicians. But I guess in fairness, I have to give credit where credit is due sometimes. About 4 or 5 years ago, Texas was looking at an annual prison budget of more than $2 billion a year. We had the highest prison population of any state in the nation, even larger than California. And the legislature actually did something about it. They instituted several programs to divert primarily regular drug users from prison space into different kinds of rehab programs. They moved a lot of drug possession cases from prisons to state jails or even as misdemeanors. They used a lot of community diversion systems, instituted some drug courts, and the result is a fairly substantial drop in prison population in the state. So that today, rather than Texas being known as the lock 'em up and throw 'em away, the key state, I've been noticing this past year that legislators in other states around the country that are faced with the same kind of prison overpopulation over budget that we had are saying, gee, let's look at Texas. They've done some good reforms. So we have, for once, the state that has done at least a few things right, that's made a few steps in the right direction. We just need to make sure that they do more of them. And remember, we have an election for the legislature coming up in November. We have a new session that starts in January. So start getting ready to send those letters to them. And as we say almost every time, a handwritten letter on paper with a real postage stamp gets the most attention. If you can't do that, try to visit your legislature in person at his local office, and he's got one in your hometown. If you can't do that, telephone call him or send him an email. But unless you tell them what you expect, there's no way they can know what to do. And for those of you that feel like that you can afford to speak out, let the rest of the world know about your own situation. We're all counting on you. Thank you and good night.
We have these private prisons that have now hired lobbyists to go get minimum mandatory review.
I began to understand that the 17 or the 19-year-old kid I had in the backseat of my police car was not a criminal at all.
Remove the profit motive. If you remove the profit motive, you can do away with almost all these problems. And how do you do that? Simple. You end prohibition, which can only mean one thing. Legalize drugs. Legalize all drugs.
If we really want to improve our urban neighborhoods, the most important thing that we could do, the single most important thing that we could do,